So this video is going to look at calculated columns. We did a video a while back, but in recent months they've changed quite a lot. We've improved how expressions work. We've also added lots of extra features. So what I thought I would do here is we already have a calculated column demo in the Adaptable website, the Adaptable demo website, which actually shows 6 calculated columns. And they're used elsewhere in conditional styles, in format columns, in layouts. They also reference each other. And in this demo here, which you can look at, we also provide all the config which we created at design time in order to create the calculated columns. So these are how we define the 6 calculated columns. You can see it's very straightforward. And these are the conditional styles, and these are the format columns, and these are the layouts. So what I thought I would do today is I will create this demo, but essentially from scratch. So what we will do is we will go into the Getting Started section where we have a no config demo, and this demo here is a blank adaptable instance sitting on top of the wonderful AG grid, and we will essentially create what we had in that other demo as we go, but instead of doing it at design time, we will do it at runtime. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take out a few columns we don't need, just to kind of make things a bit simpler. And the other thing I'll do is I'm going to configure the dashboard to add the calculated column button, because we're going to use that quite a lot. So first thing we're going to do is actually create the calculated columns, and then we'll look at how we can use them and how we can reference them elsewhere. So there's 6 calculated columns we're going to do, and a calculated column is essentially a column that has an expression, i.e. has a valuation that is evaluated each time the cell value needs to display. So it's not given a particular value, instead it's given an expression which the adaptable parser will evaluate and then display as necessary. It's probably easier to show you than to explain. So let's create our first calculated column, and this one's going to be very simple. You can see it's a scalar query. That means it's a query that returns a single value. We also have Boolean queries, which are how filters work, and then we have more complicated queries like aggregation and observable and reactive queries for very powerful use cases. So in this case here, we want to know the for each item, the item cost divided by the item count. Essentially, we want to know kind of what the average was. So there we are. That's going to tell us what the value is. We'll see it's not formatted. We'll look at this later. So let's give this a name. Let's call it average cost, but we want to give it a slightly different heading because it will look nicer kind of in the column caption. Adaptable knows it's a number. If it's wrong, you can tell it differently, but usually it works it out for you. And it allows you also to say whether it's filterable, groupable, whether you want it pivoting, etc. These are the defaults, no reason to change them. And there's the summary. Item cost divided by item count. That's what the identifier is. That's the name of the column. And then when we finish, it will create the column for us. So if we go into our layout, we will see by default it's invisible. There we are. Let's now move it up slightly so we can put it before item cost. So if I now close my layout, there we are. There's my average item cost. There's the item cost, and there's the item count. It's not formatted as we say. We'll deal with that later. But let's create a couple more calculated columns. So that one used 2 columns. What happens if you want to use more? So you can, as I say, there's the one we've created. Let's create a new one. And this one, we're going to want to know what the profit is. So the profit is going to be, let's create some brackets. And it's going to be the item cost times the item count, item cost multiplied by item count minus package cost. Okay, let's just tidy that up a little bit. So it's the item cost times the item count, and then that multiplication minus the package cost. So we'll call this profit. Again, it knows it's a number, nothing else to change, and then let's finish. We can also do evaluation, so we can, instead of making it return a number, we can make it return a string using, in this example, what we call a ternary expression. So essentially we want to look at the item cost. So we're going to say, is the item cost greater than 100? If it is, then I want us to return high. Otherwise, this is what the colon is, anything on the other side of the colon, we could return low. In fact, let's not do that. Let's use the same thing again to have slightly more complicated logic. So we'll say if it's not greater than 100, we'll next see, is it greater than 50? If it is, we'll return medium. And only if it fails that, will we return low. So, is it greater than 100 high? Otherwise, is it greater than 50 medium? Otherwise, low. This time we will call it a comment. No need to change it. And you can see AdapTable knows that we're returning a string. So there we are, we've added those two. Let's go into our layout and let's put comment. Let's stick that right at the very top, and let's put profit here as well, and let's make them both visible. And then when we finish, you can see there's our comment and there's our profit. And again, it's not formatted. We will deal with that in a moment. Let's create a couple more slightly more complicated expressions now, calculated columns. And they're going to use the inbuilt functions we have. They're the three we've created so far. You can see here that AdapTable ships with many functions. We're going to use a couple here, and you can add your own. One of the very powerful things about AdapTable is it's trivial for you to provide your own function. You tell us what it should do. You give us the piece of code that we use each time we need to evaluate, and then your users can then use that as they create their own calculated columns. So the first thing we're going to use is the max. And what this does is it returns, as you can imagine, in fact it says here, that we have documentation that's very helpful. It returns the highest of inputted numbers. So we want to know here, which is the highest of item cost, of order cost, and invoice cost. And in fact, let's add one more, and this time let's do a calculation. And we're going to say the fourth argument is going to be the package cost. Oops, not there. This fourth argument is going to be the package cost, but multiplied first by 10. So which is the highest of item cost, order cost, invoice cost, or package cost multiplied by 10? Let's call this high cost, and let's call it here highest cost. Again, it knows it's a number and it creates it. That's now been created for us. Let's create one more, and this time let's use some of the date functions. You can see we've got quite a lot of date functions to add days or stuff like that. So this one here, we want to know, has it been delayed or not? So essentially what we want to do is we want to get the ship date, which is down here. And we want to say, is the ship date greater than the order date? Okay, so, but we don't just want the order date, we want to say the order date with 35 days added to it. So we're going to use the add days function. And what that does is it takes two arguments, as you can see. It takes a date and a number of days. So the first thing is going to be the order date. And then the second argument is how many days. So we're saying here, this is now a Boolean function. It's going to return true or false. Is the ship date greater than the order date with 35 days added to it? You can see here it's a Boolean. It works that out for you. And we will call this ship delay, and nothing else to add. So there we are, we've added two more, profit, ship delay, and let's add one final calculated column, and this calculated column will itself reference another calculated column. So what we want to do is we want to work out the tax, okay? And the tax is going to be the profit times by 0.2. It's essentially going to be the VAT. But in fact, it might well be that there's no profit and we don't want to have minus tax. That doesn't make any sense. So we will use the same ternary expression we used before. So we will say, is the profit less than 0? If it is, we will return 0. Otherwise, we will return profit times 0.2. So again, that's now our expression. Let's call this tax. We don't need to change the name. It knows, actually it thinks it's a boolean, which is wrong. Why does it think it's a boolean? It doesn't, it's a mistake actually, because it's actually a number. Is the profit less than 0? Otherwise return 0. Otherwise return a profit 0.2. So actually, that is actually returning a number. Okay, now let's close that. Let's go into our layout. Let's make all these visible. And let's just move them so we can see them more easily. So let's put highest cost here. Let's move ship delay to here. And let's move tax to here. Now you can see there's a problem here with tax because it still thinks it's a boolean. So let me edit this, let me see what I've done wrong. Let me just get rid of that, do it again. Okay, now it does know it's a number. I don't think I had a space properly. So we've said, there we are. We go into settings, this time it knows it's a number, it knows it's tax, and you can now see the number. So you can see how easy it is to edit the expression if, like in this case here, I made a mistake. Okay, so we've now created all our calculated columns, but the first thing we can see is that they don't look very nice because they're giving us many, many digits. So the first thing we would want to do is we want to create a format column, and we will want to format some of these new calculated columns. So we will want to format highest cost, profit, and average item cost. And we want all of those to have a display format of 2 fraction digits. That makes life a lot nicer, makes them look a lot prettier. And then when we close that, you can see these are now all showing 2 fraction digits. Let's auto size all columns. Tax is still showing it because we didn't add that, but in fact we also want to explain what the tax is. So let's create a format column for this one here, for the tax, but let's do not just the 2 fraction digits, let's here add a prefix to say it's $1 and a suffix to explain that we're doing 20% VAT. So that is, it doesn't affect the underlying value, it merely affects the format that you can see. So when I finish that here, we can see we now have that. We've got the ship delay. Again, it's saying true, false, true, false. It's a bit hard to see, so we can very quickly format that to say show as a checkbox, and it just looks a little bit prettier. Let's take this order change column out, because let's hide it because we're not using it. And if we have a look now, we can see it looks a lot nicer, but there's still a couple of things we can do. For instance, we've got our profit column, but when we order it, it's very hard to see the difference between negative and positive numbers. So we're going to create a very quick conditional style on that, and we're going to set the for color to be green for this column, where, in this here we can use a predicate, and we can say where it's positive, finish, and it makes all those green. And let's do the same thing again. Let's create, let's not edit the conditional style, let's this time create a second conditional style. Let's make the for color to be red. The target will be a single column and it will be profit. Where is it? I can't see it. Now I can see it. And again, let's use a predicate, and let's say where it's negative. And now it's easy to see the positives and the negatives. We can also use calculated columns in row-based. So for instance, it's quite hard to see those rows where there's been a delay. Maybe we want to see all those where there's been a delay. In fact, let's change this edit calculated column, and let's say we want it where it's that way. Again, you can see how easy it is to edit them. And now, for those rows where there's been a delay, we would like to make that more obvious. So what we can do is we can create a new calculated column. This time we'll do it on a back colour, so we'll say let's make it brown. We'll make the fore colour to be yellow. The target can be the whole row. The condition will now be a boolean, and here's our ship delay. So we can say ship delay equals to true. And you can see there's our calculated column. We can now also use these things in layout. So you can see we've got this nice little layout. So let's say we want to save it. So we can configure our layout. We can just give it a name, and we will call this basic layout. And it remembers everything we've done. It remembers the sorting and finish. Or we could create a new layout. So let's create a new layout. Let's call it root. And here we're just going to have a few of our new columns. But what we're going to do is we're going to aggregate, because even though this is our profit, we're going to aggregate this by sum. And let's have the highest cost, and let's also aggregate it. You can do different types of aggregations here, you can see, but sum seems fine. Oops, didn't need to do that. Let me go back in and still need to do that again. Call it group layout. Let's aggregate that by sum. Let's do profit by sum. Let's make that visible. Let's make that by sum. And let's just add a couple more columns. And let's in fact group by comment. Okay, so there we are. We finish this. There's our new one. You can see we're now grouping by our calculated column of comment, and the calculated columns we created earlier of profit, highest cost and tax are themselves all fully aggregatable. So there's a lot more to show in calculated columns, but hopefully this demo showed you how we created the one earlier with all these calculated columns, comment, tax, profit, how we made some calculated columns refer to other calculated columns, and how we can style and format them. As ever, thank you for watching, and do please get in touch if you have any questions.